Good evening and welcome to Generation Movies on a Monday night in January. And the country is freezing. Freezing. It's cold out.
It's cold, like hell froze over cold.
I can't imagine why. Anyway, welcome to Generation Movie. My name is J.W. Colwell. Joining me as always is my co-host in crime, the yin to my yang. Rich Drees, how are you today? How is everything going?
I'm doing pretty good. Spent a nice day watching some movies. Caught up on a really nice Josephine Baker film that I've not seen before. Enjoyed that.
Yeah, you were hitting the TCM pretty hard today. You were all about that. All about that. Finding something homey and nice.
Well, I do have like about 80 movies on my Hulu DVR from TCM that have just been piling up, and I'm like, I really got to make a dent in this at some point. Hopefully, maybe clear most of them off. Like,
oh no, I hear you. I'm in the same boat. I'm starting, like, because I've been dealing with teeth for 3 weeks. I haven't really gotten any of my Oscar things in. Like, and some I just missed because like they only played like 1 or 2 weeks, so. I'm behind. I'm certainly behind before Thursday when we get our Oscar nominations. And it's going to be an interesting year because I think the Academy. I'm going to say this. I think the Academy has a movie they should give the Oscar to, and could bring people in and everybody be happy about. But I fear they're going to choose the movie that's 3.5 hours long that I'm going to see on Wednesday. I'm going to see The Brutalist on Wednesday.
It's fascinating. Fantastic.
I expect it to be brilliant. I expect it to be it did hit a big snag this week. Before we talk about anything else, it hit a pretty big snag when it was revealed that the editor of the film has used AI to punch up the Hungarian parts of the movie. Which is, like, not in a bad way, not impacting anybody's performances or anything, but it is a chink in the armor when you and I talk about the sheer volume of people fighting in Hollywood over AI. If you have a movie that you've bragged about making for 10 million and then somebody inadvertently drops out in an interview that they used AI on any piece of it, it's going to cause a ruckus. It's going to cause a kerfluffle. So I don't know.
I think, and this is something we talked about actually just earlier today when I was recording the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle Film Scribes podcast. I'm a member of. I'm actually producing their podcast now. So this was actually a topic that came up in our recording today, which will be out on probably Wednesday if I can get through it all by tomorrow evening. And it depends on where the AI is being used. It's not generating a performance. It's not used for a performance.
No.
But there are some AI tools that are already in use, even in things like Photoshop and Adobe Acrobat has some tools.
I'm not going to lie. I think
use this stuff. It's a brush, as one of my critics said.
Okay, I'm sorry.
But how is that brush used? It's not generating a performance, which I would find absolutely unacceptable. I'm still a little iffy because I didn't have enough time to read about all of this, so I kind of sat back a little on that conversation. But and I didn't know we were going to talk about it here.
I'm so sorry. Either. I was just.
No.
I made plans to go see The Brutalist. Anyway, so what I'm saying is, like, these kinks that come up in an Oscar season are it's a major kink for something that's been cruising as, like, a movie that has an intermission and it's 3 hours long and it's got an epic American story, and then it just hits a speed bump, right? And I think if the Academy wanted to consider, like, making people happy and being like, I think you vote Wicked and you just go, Hey, a lot of people love that movie. Guess what? Nothing to fucking hate here, right? As opposed to, making him,
I
but again, I can't wait to see it. I'm looking forward to it. I'm
I would
behind.
hope Wicked is gets kind of its flowers next year once we get the whole thing to kind of make way. Because if we go this year and then next, part two is equally as good, do we, award it
Here's the
again?
problem,
And
though. Rich, here's the problem with that, though, is that's what we were saying about Dune. And now Dune 2 is eligible, and
Mhm.
it's not the front runner. You know what I mean? Like, I think you need to strike while the iron's hot. But again, this is a small thing. Let's say hi to some folks, and we'll also talk about some other things. Sean Smith and hey brothers, hey Sean, Joe Ridgely. Good evening,
Hey,
gentlemen.
Sean,
Good evening, Joe. Glad you're feeling better
you good?
again. Good evening, Ken McKernan. Thank you for
Kenny.
guarding the loud and nerdy things. Cold, like cold humbug. I guess -3 degrees in the shop right now. Still working. Get get a blanket. I'm only -9, but colder here overnight. We're at like 45. That's -20 for Florida. We'll get to -9 or 2 more tonight.
Yeah,
So the
I am
other
at 9 degrees here.
fuck that.
Yeah,
Anyway,
I'm not happy.
perfect time to sit in and watch movies. So I'm gonna try to catch up on some stuff. The major news of the week though has got to be, and I wanted to put a little bit of time on it. Of course tonight we're talking about Seven, which is a fantastically, wonderfully bleak '90s movie. This is of course our What's in the Box episode, but I also want to. We do need to devote a little time to this man right here. We lost David Lynch. And here's the interesting thing, right? As we're doing Seven tonight, um, and you sent me a link about a bunch of people who are a little bit crazy thinking Zack Snyder is the heir apparent. The
Yeah, I don't
interesting
even
thing
want
to me
assholes any
about
Oscar.
those people are crazy. But the interesting thing is, the director of the movie tonight we're watching, I think, is the Lynch apparent. I think he is the guy that looks at things in odd ways or in interesting ways that we have never seen before. But David Lynch, Rich, I know you're a bigger fan than I was, so I
Yeah.
want to make sure you get a good taste. I'm just going to click some pictures and talk about some of my favorite movies that are not necessarily his most well known, but let's go for it. You first.
I think Lynch's impact on film and television can't properly be assessed right in this moment. Obviously, huge Twin Peaks fan. That's where it kind of started for me in college.
I
And
think that's for
you know,
everybody, right? That's
it was
for
one of
everybody.
those things that showed people television could be more. And even if we didn't have Twin Peaks, we probably still would have gotten to that peak television era we seem to be kind of rolling out of now. We would have gotten there anyways, but Twin Peaks definitely laid the foundation for it. I mean, somebody would have come along and given us something, probably not as good, to be quite honest, because Twin Peaks is one of the greatest television shows ever made. And I will fight singularly or all at once about that.
I don't think you're going to get a lot of fights. I think it was Twin Peaks at its height was one of those shows that everybody was watching and everybody was talking about and everybody's trying to figure out. And Twin Peaks, I think the television show, not necessarily the movie version, Twin Peaks had the vibe of a Lost or the vibe of the X-Files, like shows that were required viewing and viewing that our generation, you and I, and the people that are a little bit younger than us, we look back and we go, we had to wait every week for stuff. You know what I mean? Like it was torturous, but also incredible because you had a whole week to ponder what was happening.
Ponder the mysteries, ponder the
A shot,
sadness, that
yeah,
the shock that was underlying a bucolic existence of of almost a 1950s sense of Americana that probably never really existed to begin with, anyways. And that was interesting. That's what Lynch liked to do the most. I mean, obviously, anything from Blue Velvet to Wild at Heart kind of explored these things. My God, I know it got terrible reviews at first, but Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me is, I think, one of the most effective psychological horror films that's ever been made.
And he was like, he was a true artist. He was like a painter.
Yeah, he understood dream logic, I think, better than anybody.
Almost anybody.
And
yeah, I would agree.
Nightmare logic as well. I mean, normally I would not advise watching a movie like if you're kind of tired and you're ready to go to sleep, because movies can sometimes be hypnotic and kind of draw you in that way. And if you're kind of tired, that's probably not a good way to experience a movie for the first time. However, in college, we rented a bunch of movies one night, including Eraserhead. We got to Eraserhead at the end of the night, like around 1 o'clock in the morning. And I was kind of punchy, because I'd probably been up for about 18, 19 hours at that point. And the first time I saw Eraserhead, I was literally in that weird kind of like half sleep twilight thing. And it was an amazing experience.
Yeah,
it was a horrific experience.
I wouldn't wish that. I wouldn't wish that on anybody.
I wouldn't wish. Gone back and rewatched it a number of times, but I think he almost would have liked if I had ever had the chance to tell him that's how I experienced it. I think he might have actually chuckled at that. I don't know.
Gotten a kick out of it. I was looking at his filmography, right? So you have Eraserhead in '77. You have The Elephant Man, which is an amazing movie from 1980. You have the first Dune, which has its fans and is not necessarily a bad version, just not as grand or epic as Denis Villeneuve, his version.
Yeah.
You have Blue Velvet, which I think is the movie that caught me by surprise in '86. Right, I was 12. I was watching movies that were much older than I was. Then Wild at Heart, 1990, Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me in '92, Lost Highway, and then one of my absolute favorite movies that nobody talks about with him, because it's such a weird movie, but because it's a wonderful movie, is this movie called The Straight Story, which I think is so off and different from anything on his filmography. And if you've never seen it, it's just a beautiful story about a guy traveling from one place to another on his lawnmower. It's beautiful. He has to get from one place to another. All the people he meets. It's just a weird, wonderful, wacky, based on a true story movie. And then he did Mulholland Drive, which is also one of those movies that everybody seems to still talk about, and Inland Empire. TV at Twin Peaks, On the Air, Hotel Room, a couple of episodes, and he had the Twin Peaks revival for Showtime in 2017. But he was a painter, he was a musician, he was like, he designed furniture for his movies. You know what I mean? Like,
back in the '90s, I went to an exhibition of his painting in Philadelphia, and it was amazing. Usually, it's just if you get close to painting, you see like brush strokes and maybe where the paint was a little thicker here, a little thinner there, what have you. But he was actually putting like little pieces of other media into it, like little pieces of paper with like letters on them. There was one painting that had dead flies sprinkled onto it. It was amazing. And then also the place where this was also showing some of his short films, like The Cowboy and the Frenchman, a couple of others that were equally as interesting as any of his feature work has ever been.
About his paintings, when you speak of that, I wouldn't know what to do with color. Color to me is too real. It's limiting. It doesn't allow too much of a dream. The more you throw black into color, the more dreamy it gets. Black has depth. It's like a little egress. You can go into it, and because it keeps on continuing to be dark, the mind kicks in. A lot of things that are going on in there become manifest, and you start seeing what you're afraid of, start seeing what you love, and it becomes like a dream. Yes, the answer is yes. Again, right? Right. Yeah. I think they have a thing. Uh, the unified field is what it was called, right? The Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts is where Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts is where you saw
Yep.
it, right? Yeah. The
I think
unified
so. Yeah.
field. Yeah. But it's one of those things. He was just a great director. I know a lot of people, like a lot of people who wouldn't necessarily fall into the normie realm, right, are sad today because he was one of those guys that, for whatever reason, reached into their soul and just said, "This guy understands what I'm going through or what I'm looking at." Who killed Laura Palmer is like one of the great TV questions, right? It's pop culture at its finest. It's everything you'd want from the medium. And you're right. I think his turn, Twin Peaks is one of those shows that led a revival that was required viewing. Like you didn't know where. I think it was on Thursday nights, right? You would go, or was it Tuesday nights? Can't remember.
A
But
third
you would,
first season premiered on a Sunday with a 2-hour thing, and then it ran Thursday nights because we had to take over a TV lounge and, against the rules, hook up a VCR to record it every Thursday night.
I love that you're breaking the rules.
Hey, it was me and my friend Damon. I see, buddy. And because we were both like just totally into what Lynch was doing and everything. So
Hey, Raven, late to the party, but glad I didn't miss the Lynch talk. Hey, guys. Weatherman. I love that quote, JW. Yes, that's where it was. So, yeah, he was super talented. He was a one of one. And for a lot of people, he was one of those directors that, like, no matter if you loved his movies or were confused by them or you were confounded by them or you're like, I wish this is, something different happened. The one thing about David Lynch movies is you always talk about them, right? Once you see them or you turn other people onto them, or I'll never forget, watching Blue Velvet and the fucking, first sequence with the ear, and then, people show up wearing fucking like, gas masks, and it just bonkers. And it's the soft underbelly of suburbia, the soft, sleazy kind of like creepy, crunchy underbelly that's there, but doesn't necessarily show itself or reveal itself until you're stuck in whatever quagmire you're in. You know what I mean? Like, and I think Twin Peaks does the same thing. And like I said, the one of the more, for me, one of the more interesting movies, when you look up and you're watching The Straight Story, and it's fucking directed by David Lynch, you're like, how? What? How did this happen? But then it's such a great movie. It's G rated. It was a G rated movie when the G rating wasn't being allowed anymore. Like, you very rarely saw G rated movies.
well,
And it's one of the more
studios
pleasant.
realized G rating wasn't going to sell a lot of tickets. So even on the most benign children's thing, they would say, "Can you slide in at least a jam or a hell so we get a
I need a PG, baby."
Mm-hmm.
Well, something that's not well, a couple things. As we end our Lynch talk, I wish him wherever he's at, whatever dreamscape he's living in right now. I wish him the best. I hope he finds out what's going on with the midget, and maybe gets a slice of cherry pie and goes happily on his way. Maybe finds a log that he can befriend.
As I said on Facebook or on one of my socials, I just prefer to think he's now in the White Lodge hanging out with Catherine Coulson, who played the log lady, Jack Nance, who played Eraserhead and was in Twin Peaks, and David Bowie. And they're all just talking and having a good time and catching up and sharing love with each other.
The Raven writes, I got Randy into Twin Peaks. When it came out, I bought my friend's copy the night after if I paid for the tapes. See, that's the level of that is the level of thing these kids are never going to understand. You with you, Rich. And then Log Lady. But what another thing that kind of happened this weekend, not as big as David Lynch. We had MLK box office weekend. It wasn't great. Like, it kind of fell on itself. Everything kind of collapsed inward. Although Mufasa is kind of chugging along in a provocative way. You know, it went to number one. It hasn't relinquished number one since like it relinquished number one last week, but then it got number one back this week. But Wolfman bombed, Rich, and I want to talk about that for a moment before we start before we start 7. Wolfman bombed, and the reason I think not that it bombed big, it doesn't have to do super well. But I think the reason it's getting guff is because it's not actually a Wolfman movie. Like, I know this sounds stupid as stupid can be, but if you're Universal Studios and you're releasing a movie called Wolfman, it needs to be a werewolf movie. And I was trying to. Well, okay. Let me explain my reaction to it. Okay. I think it's akin to 28 Days Later is to Wolfman as zombie films are to werewolf movies. Mm-hmm. So I think when you have a movie named Wolfman and you theoretically have a Wolfman that's going to be in the movie, and then it doesn't show up, and it's kind of like this interesting take, like a take I like. And I was thinking about it. It's very much in line with The Invisible Man, right? In that it's a realistic look at what could, how a monster can be derived, right? Mm-hmm. But I think what happens is because it's Universal and because it has that stigma attached to it, right? If you don't go and it doesn't look like a little bit like Lon Chaney, doesn't have to look like him a lot, but it has to be a little bit more. I thought the performances were good. I thought Julie Garner wasn't really. It was weird casting for her, but I thought Christopher Abbott was really good. And I really like
what Abbott was doing prior to his transformation becoming physical, prior to them slapping on the makeup.
Yes, it's a really great nuanced performance, but I think where it lost track of itself this weekend is that people went and it wasn't a Wolfman movie. They came out of it going, "Where the fuck were the wolves?" And it's like, if you don't read that first section of the movie, when the movie opens, like you know how many people show up late to movies? Not us, Rich. Not people who watch our show, obviously, right?
Because they're good and honest people,
and they want to see trailers. And also, but if you show up late and you don't get that thing at the beginning, the log line at the beginning, the movie could come across as confusing. And I think that's I don't know why it didn't do as well as they thought it was going to do, but it was one of those things where I think every once in a while the audience goes, "I was promised a Wolfman. This is not a Wolfman." And they do something and that's all it is. It's as simple as like buyer's remorse about something where you're not sure. And although I think the take is really interesting, it's kind of a unique take. It's a virus movie that has, overwhelming implications. I was talking about it. If this virus gets out into the world, what's the over under on the world's succumb? Like, this is thing level virus, right? Because it's fast, and you know what I mean. Like, I was watching it going, thank God this takes place in the Pacific Northwest. Jesus, this could have been disastrous. But that's a little bit too much for people to think about. Like, they just want a Wolfman.
Yeah, I mean, I
didn't hate it. I liked it.
Thematically, it felt underdeveloped to me, and it was pointed out to me that Winnell said that this is supposed to be a movie about losing a loved one to something like Alzheimer's. And I was like, okay, in retrospect, I see it. But in the moment when I was in the theater this weekend,
I didn't see it. And that's the other thing. That's the other thing that's kind of a weird, kind of wonky thing. And, it got really bad cinema scores. Like, drastically bad cinema scores for horror films. You get a B as a horror film, it's 60 million. You know what I mean? And I think the interesting thing is, like, part of it is about the uncomfortableness of some of the subject matter, like, dealing with spousal, like with, childhood trauma. And it's a little bit about that. It's a little bit like, it's basically something I would imagine, like you said, it's about all, like they said about Alzheimer's. I didn't see any of that. I wasn't thinking
Okay,
about.
I'm not the only one then.
Yeah, I wasn't. I was thinking more about the idea of childhood trauma impacting, the next generation doing everything they can to protect the ones they love, but sometimes we sometimes we succumb to our inner demons. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and
But Alzheimer's I never got, so I don't know.
especially since his last film, Invisible Man, was very much thematically in tune with the idea of like domestic violence and things like that. And I really liked that it recast a horror monster idea into something like that. That it
like
kind of
a practical version,
yeah,
kind of a
and
Nolanization of the Universal horror films, right? Kind of like we're gonna make this practical. The Joker's gonna be practical. The Invisible Man's gonna be practical. We're gonna have a virus instead of an actual guy turning into an actual werewolf. And I think that's the interesting thing for me is that sometimes we do get audience revolts where they're just like, no matter how good the concept is, they can't get over the fact you called your movie a Wolfman, and this doesn't look like a Wolfman. It's kind of like when I talked about they did a Halloween Horror Nights thing of the father or the wolf, right, the big wolf, and they did it down here, and it was out in public where it could be pictured and seen, and people lost their fucking minds. You know what I mean?
I think that was a bad move. That was a bad move because I think the creature design works for the story that they're telling.
Right.
But taking that out of context before people get a chance to see the movie and just show them that, nah.
Yes,
that didn't work.
So that
bad marketing.
Bad marketing. And I also think it leads to the thing we're talking about, which is you promised me a Wolfman. Where is my Wolfman? You know what I mean? Like, as simple as that. Horror movies should need to be in October. That's not true. Some of the best horror movies of the year. I think a good horror movie can be made any time of the year. We can enjoy them.
I don't want to see. I'm not a big horror guy, but I don't want to see them kind of like ghettoized to like 1 month out of the year.
Yeah, I mean, because then we wouldn't have had long legs, wouldn't have
that's scary, and then walk out into the bright, sunshiny summer day, knowing that everything's a-okay. You know,
you know what? We're speaking about Oscar nominations. I still am hopeful that we'll get some sort of Strange Darling love on Thursday. I don't know that we're going to, but anyway, one of my sleepers of the year.
At the very least, I would hope
screenplay
screenplay, because I think it's structured wonderfully.
It's such a great screenplay, and I think her performance is really good too. But I don't think there's too many good female performances this year. Anyway, let's go back to a time when 1995, shall we? Trent Reznor not scoring films, but instead his music being in films. We're going to talk about Seven. If you like our show, if you like what we talk about, if you like our opinions, how we look at things, by all means, like, subscribe, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, Threads, TikTok, whatever, Twitter. TikTok's back though. Somebody saved TikTok from what I hear. Like us in all those places. Come back. Tell your friends about us. Come and visit us on Monday nights. Let's talk, Rich. You made a joke that I thought was the best joke of the day when you're like, I'm so glad we found something happy to watch
for this spirits today. Yes.
For our 2025 kickoff with the Goonies, and then we're jumping into Seven. And the research on this one is interesting and it was something I was really intrigued. I saw it again in IMAX a week ago. I don't know what they've done with this 4K restoration of it or what they've done with the IMAX, but what I'm going to say to you is this movie is so dark. It was dark in 95. It's dark in 2025. It's dark, but the 4K and the IMAX restorations you can definitely see a lot more on a big screen, and that is one of the things that I was taken away when I saw it 2 weeks
Mhm.
ago. But the production of this movie is interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me preface this with a story.
Okay.
This summer, happy summer movie. I was very glad to walk out of the theater, and it's summer and everything's a-okay and sunshiny. I was dating this wonderful young lady, and her younger sister was turning 16, I think, 15 or 16. And so my girlfriend
I can
says,
see
"Hey,
where this is going. This
let's
is
take my
terrible.
younger sister out for dinner and a movie for her birthday, and we'll let her pick the movie." And I was like, "Sure, no problem. Sounds like fun." So we all go out, we have a wonderful meal, and I was like, "Okay, Ella, what movie do you want to go see?" And she says, Seven. Now, it's a hard rated R movie, hard R for 1995. And I was kind of like, well, okay, just, if your mom's not cool with it, that's fine. I will gladly lie. So we took, this kid, a young teenager, to see a movie about horrific murder and
Ghastly.
psychosis, a
Ghastly
ghastly,
murder. Ghastly.
and for her birthday. So if you're out there watching Ella, I apologize for
I'm
possibly
sorry
scarring
I
you.
scarred you, and I hope you're in therapy. So the production thing, I think the story of Seven, how it got written, how it came to pass, right? I think one of the more interesting things is that story, right? So you have a struggling film writer, would be film writer, right? He's
Mhm.
he's basically somebody that's recently moved from the suburbs of Pennsylvania, which could be our direction,
Mhm.
to New York
I
City.
think he was a Philly guy, actually.
That
Uh,
that makes sense? Suburbs of Pennsylvania is fine.
mhm.
And then he moves to New York. He sees a lot of stuff going on. It's 90s culture shock. So 91, he's working at Tower Records. You remember Tower Records, Rich? The glorious, glorious Tower Records.
How about, do you miss Tower Records, Rich? And then I'll be like, yes,
Yes,
I
in
do.
this Tower Records. We had a
I miss
Tower
giving
Records.
money on all my trips to the city.
Yes, we had a Tower Records and at GW. It was in the comment. Anyway, so he's working there. He's watching all these people, and he writes, "It's true that if I hadn't lived there, I probably wouldn't have written Seven, because it was a depressing time in New York City. But
Mm.
basically, he saw everything every day, where it was just lots of evil, and being able to kind of not being able to fix anything, and that's kind of what the movie is about, right? It's seeing evil on a street corner every day and not just kind of walking past it. That's what
Yeah.
the killer's out to do. And I think that's a real interesting story in that this guy was struggling, wrote this screenplay, and kind of earned a minimum amount of money from the Screen Actors Guild, and eventually had to rewrite it 13 times, Rich. 13 times for the amount that he was paid because, and this is a true story, the original studio behind the movie didn't like the ending. So they rewrote a happy ending with I guess the ending
Oh.
was, yes, they rewrote an ending that doesn't have a what's in the box, which I think is really amazing, and he rewrote the ending. The ending apparently ended with, I guess, Doe and Somerset Mills in an abandoned church that was burnt out by a fire, and I guess Doe killing Mills, then Somerset killing Doe, and being framed in some way for something, and then Gwyneth Paltrow leaving town.
That sounds terrible.
And that sounds fucking awful compared to what's in the box. And that's where he got saved, because basically, he's getting all this rip, and this is an interesting kind of like thing that you notice. So it's in development. Jeremiah Chechik, who directed Christmas Vacation, was up for it, which is ridiculous. And then basically, it eventually got optioned to New Line, and Guillermo del Toro, Phil Janu were up for it, and eventually it lands on David Fincher's desk. Now here's where it gets fun, Rich. David Fincher at this point was back working commercials and doing whatever, because he had just gotten done with Alien 3, which I will stand by as the worst sequel in the history of film. For me personally, I just hate it so much. Anyway, he had a bad experience because they cut the movie and they did a lot of things to it, and they whatever. So here he is. He gets the script sent to him, where the guy is jumping through hoops by the studio. Right? He's jumping through hoops. And he reads the original script with the original head in the box. And he says, yeah, I'm going to do this. I'm going to try it. At which point the studio says, oh, sorry, you got one of the first, you got the first draft. You didn't get, we're on draft 13 now. And Fincher's like, okay, gets the 13th draft, says, I'm not going to do it unless we do the original draft, and starts fighting for the guy. Mm-hmm. And to me, that's an interesting story, Rich, because you have a guy that had a movie kind of ripped away from him in Alien 3, right, by the studio. And here he is watching a guy jump through hoops with a screenplay that he looks at the first draft and goes, that's the movie. And
I think he had an empathy there for Andrew Kevin.
That's what I mean. Like, right. It's the idea that I know what it's like to go through a studio fucking with my shit, right? And so it's one of those things where you go, that's really interesting. There's an empathy there where he goes, no, what you wrote was good. Like, I don't know why they're futzing about it. We're going to make the original. And the only person at New Line that understood this was horror impresario Michael DeLuca. And I read that and I went, of course Michael DeLuca said, let's do the bleak. Let's do the scary, right? He was present in production for New Line, but he really liked the original script. And so they started filming in secret before anybody realized what version of the script they were shooting. I thought that was cool as shit. I thought that was an amazing production story. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And then all the different things you hit upon in the production, original casting choices, the idea that, fucking Pitt had to jump through fucking hoops because he was Brad Pitt, right? Casting like Pitt, and just finished Interview with the Vampire and Legends of the Fall. But he wasn't like up for Mills because of the image, right? That he was this, ladies' man, whatever. And he was trying to change his trajectory, right? And
it absolutely was a pivot point in his career.
It really is. And the thing is, it's one of those lucky, happy castings where, the producer, Arnold Kopelson, who just passed away recently, one of the great producers, shortened the schedule, moved things around, made sure that Pitt could be in this movie. And I always Pitt describing the character he's taught, he's interviewed about this movie. I think it's one of his best performances. Like, mm-hmm. I think from a strictly acting standpoint, he has a through line of the character that he knows the moment he hits the movie, he is fully invested in this character. And it's one of my favorite Brad Pitt performances. But I love how he talks. He calls him he calls Mills a well-intentioned idiot who speaks before he really knows what he's talking about all the time.
Yeah, that feels right.
That's and it's great. So I'm
impressed with in the production the amount of rain that they wind up using. Los Angeles, very famously and unfortunately, tragically, as the last couple of weeks have shown us, a very dry drought prone state. So the idea that you can watch this movie and you sort of feel, is this supposed to take place in Seattle?
Seattle,
because it just feels
yeah,
like it's down
Seattle and Pacific Northwest. Like we're just talking about the Wolfman, but yeah, I mean it's just wild. And the Twin Peaks, the movie, it reminds me of a Blade Runner. It's fucking raining all the time. Never stops raining. And everything just feels icky. Like the production design is amazing. Like
it's fun. What's funny though, while watching it this evening, rewatching it this evening, first time I've watched it since my LA trip, I actually recognized the location. I was like, I've been there.
I was there.
The scene where Brad Pitt is in his car and the officer comes up with
the Cliff Notes.
The Cliff Notes of stuff.
Cliff Notes.
That's on the same block as the Biltmore on Grand. It's on the Grand Street, South Grand Street side, and if you look out the window past, on the other side of the street, you'll see like a ramp going up. And then a ramp going down. I've walked down that ramp, and that's also the ramp in the couple scenes later where the cops all come peeling up out of the garage. I think that's the same ramp, but I've walked down that ramp and across and back up because it's also a location for from Chinatown and Buckaroo Banzai, and I was scoping out that entire area walking around.
Don't say it was Chinatown. You know you were doing it because of Buckaroo Banzai. Anyway,
well, it's Chinatown also. I realized it as I was standing there. I was like, wait a minute, this is from Chinatown. And I had my iPad with me, so I literally pulled up my Plex server, accessed Chinatown, and scrolled through.
And the casting is part of the allure of this movie. You have fucking Morgan Freeman, you have Pitt, you have Paltrow, and then eventually we'll get to Spacey. But they were originally, for Freeman, they were worried about the concept of like dealing with Lethal Weapon overdrive, right? So they tried to cast Duvall, Pacino. I don't know any of those people would have worked. Maybe Duvall. You know what I mean? It's so weird.
I don't think Pacino just has the energy for this role.
Because it's a subtle dark energy he's kind of there. Gwyneth Paltrow beat out Robin Wright, Christina Applegate, and basically got it strictly on the fact that Brad Pitt talked her up before her audition with the filmmakers about Legends of the Fall. Rich, do you know who was originally supposed to be John Doe that would eventually go to Kevin Spacey? Ned Beatty. And I looked at that today and just went, that is so interesting. Except Beatty turned it down because it was the most evil thing I've ever read.
Well, he's not wrong.
That's interesting, but like think about it. It's Ned Beatty, Rich. He's read Deliverance. He's definitely read Deliverance. So I was looking at that. That's really interesting. They wanted him because he looked like the picture of the Zodiac at the time. Michael Stipe also turned it down, but because they were conflicting band dates. Christopher Guest from Waiting for Guffman and Best in Show. Val Kilmer. He would have been great.
He would have been great.
Val Kilmer and Gene Hackman also declined. Arlie Ermey auditioned for it.
Wait! Time out. Time out. In regards to your T-shirt, Gene Hackman and so basically Lex Luthor and Otis turned this movie down.
Yes.
Valerie Perrine not
Why do you think I'm wearing the shirt? Why do you think
Valerie
I'm not?
as well?
Miss Tessmacher was not available. Why do you think I'm wearing the shirt? Anyway, amazing. Once I did the research, I was like, what the fuck? And so they all turned it down. And then basically they had to jump through hoops to get Spacey, but Spacey talked about getting cast. Pitt basically talked him into it, and they basically did it on the fly. But the reason he's not credited in the film, I just done Swimming with Sharks, The Usual Suspects, and Outbreak. All three of those movies hit 94, 95. All three of
Mhm.
those movies hit in 94, 95. I knew that if any of those movies did well, my profile would be different. If I'm the third billed actor in a movie where the top two billings are trying to find somebody and they don't find somebody until the last reel, then it's obvious who the somebody is. I felt very strongly that it was the right thing to do for the movie. We finally won because it was a deal breaker. I was either going to be on a plane to shoot it, the movie, or I wasn't. So basically, they basically had a whole thing where, um, you know, fighting about getting Kevin Spacey in the movie. They wanted him, but it was one of those things where, you know, he only filmed the scenes in 12 days, and they did it, you know, specifically to keep everything, whatever. The rest, the victims, all have interesting stories as well. The gluttony guy, um, the greed cat filmmaker was the guy was cast because he looked like Robert Shapiro. It was right around the time of the OJ trial. And
Mhm.
then once he got there, he was asked to perform nude and got 5 times his Screen Actors Guild rate. Um, Michael Reed McKay, who plays the sloth victim, basically involved. His audition was portraying a corpse that slowly turned his head towards the camera. And then the
Yeah.
set decorator was the lust victim after Fincher's assistant said she had the person about to portray a dead prostitute. So, um, I look at that. Also, I think the interesting thing here is that Arlie Ermy auditioned, but he thought he was too scary, unsympathetic, and frightening is what they said about Arlie Ermy. But I was thinking about it, Arlie Ermy wouldn't have been a bad choice, right? Like
Mhm.
I could see him reading the Bible verses and being utterly fucking creepy. We're just sitting in the back, and instead of like Spacey's kind of light performance, Arlie Ermy going, "You think this is a good world?" You know, just I could see it. I could see it. The other
There would be
main,
an anger level to his
yeah,
performance. Spacey is so detached from everything he's talking about
yeah,
that is that such a great, scary,
yeah,
unnerving performance.
yes,
And
yes,
it's a shame that Spacey turned out to be a complete piece of shit, and
yeah.
we
It actually turned
don't
out, yeah, we don't talk badly
use
about
him
Arlie
for
Ermy
being
there.
which is good
Um, so
because he's unrepentant. But
the yeah,
ironically,
ironically,
uh,
the last thing I want to talk about, title credits. This is the first movie of the '90s to do the title credits where it was super cool title credit sequence where it kind of gave an idea of what was going on in the movie, but you didn't. If you don't know what you're watching, you have no idea what the fuck it is until after the movie's over, right? Um, and you know, they had hand model. They had like, it's the first time. Um, you know, they added the fucking Trent Reznor music. It's the first time title credit sequence gave something away in a major motion picture in the '90s, where like they give a lot away. Actually, they give tons of shit away if you rewatch the title sequence. Um, but the movie opens, Rich. The movie opens, and first off, I do need to put this out there. New Line thought they had a bomb on its hands. It opens in September 19th, 1995. So it's in a dead zone in what used to be a dead zone in the movie calendar. All of the
mhm.
fucking test screenings went awful, but it does well, Rich. And not only does it do well, it does well for several weeks. Like it and a time when, you know, number one movies were kind of one after the other. It opens the first weekend. It beats Showgirls on September 22nd, I should say. It beats Showgirls 14 million to 8 million. And Showgirls was heavily talked about, but it was also X rated, so you couldn't get, or NC-17, so you couldn't get in. It also beat Tu Wong Fu, thanks to Julie Newmar. Then it had the highest grossing September weekend at the time ever, 14 million. We're well past that now. Um,
Mhm.
and, you know, audiences polled by the research gave the film a B. Um, and then to avoid competition, they moved it around. But the numbers are incredible, Rich. So it opens to $14 million, has a production budget of 30. So already in the 95 movie, it's already well on its way. It opens at 2,400 theaters. It eventually hits 2,500 theaters max. It lasts 12 and a half weeks in the fall of 95. And so it ends up grossing 100 million domestic, but get this, Rich, 228 million worldwide for a grand worldwide total of $328 million. Knowing I love it and I know how well it did, I had no idea it did $300 million at the worldwide box office. And I was looking at it going, that's a huge number. And then you do the inflation, Rich. The number jumps to 248. 248, Rich, that means it outgrosses Mufasa and Sonic 3. Like, unbelievable, like, amount of money
Again,
this movie made.
And as an R-rated movie, it has a limited amount, a smaller, limited audience that it can sell tickets to, unless you're taking a teenager to it.
Even more impressive, unless you're taking a 16-year-old teenager who you're going to impact possibly for the rest of her life.
Negatively, yes.
Theoretically, she's in therapy. But it opens, it does well. It lasts forever that year, and it kept on popping back up. So it remained second. It came out against movies that were really, like Halloween, The Curse of Michael Myers. It played against Devil in a Blue Dress. It finally dropped to 3 instead of 1 or 2 when Get Shorty and Now and Then opened. So it was whatever. And then it wasn't at $100 million, but they re-released it near the holidays for the Academy Award nomination area. And it grossed just enough to get over 100 million.1, which means it's ahead of Die Hard with a Vengeance for the summer or for the year of 1995. Crazy. And the amount of money it did worldwide is also insane. That $328 million, I never thought I thought it was a hit. Right? Sometimes you watch a movie, it's a hit, like Longlegs was a hit. It grossed 70 million. 328 million worldwide is impressive. Critical response then and now, because we're kind of flying by the seat of our pants now. So always a popular movie, but also a bleak movie. But also, like, an interesting thing that you have to look at in the run is that in this time frame that we're dealing with, you have Silence of the Lambs, The Usual Suspects. You have all these movies about murder, all these movies about, very glorified villains, right? But it gets good reviews, right? It gets reviews because of how well how great it looks. Darius Kanji gets a lot of props for that. That the cinematography is superb. The Fincher direction, though, is really good, and the acting is what I think sets it apart from other kind of 90s fare, right? Because I think the scenes that I gravitated more towards now, when I saw it now, the scenes with Paltrow and Morgan Freeman are absolutely stunning. They are incredibly acted scenes, right? They're both like, it's most like when she invites him over for dinner is really beautiful, and then when she meets him because she doesn't have any other friends in the small dank coffee shop where he gets the secret of the movie that she's pregnant, and she and then it gets into Freeman's story. There are some really well crafted scenes and well crafted acting, right? The rest of the movie is gloss and like thriller at its finest. Cops trying to chase down somebody that's trying to complete whatever his mission is. You know what I mean?
And there's a lot of little interesting, fun grace notes in this movie, I think.
Yeah.
Mills' dogs. He has dogs. That's a nice little point in the thing that doesn't come up again. and honestly kind of makes you a little scared for what might have happened to them, considering everything else in the movie. When
I don't.
when
They
Morgan
don't
Freeman
do
goes,
sins. The dogs don't do sins, Rich.
I know,
I freely believe the dog men
I
live.
have a feeling things did not go well for them, and that makes me sad. When Morgan Freeman goes to the library, we just needed maybe
Fantastic.
the guys, somebody lets him in, so he goes off, and we get that montage. We don't need him having a chat with the security guards or anything like that. It's just a nice little extra texture and
No, but
layer
what
that.
he says to them, is so beautiful. Where he's like, "You guys choose to play poker. You're surrounded by beauty on all sides every night."
Mhm.
He's like, "Yeah, but you can't win money playing, reading." Like, oh, it's like, oh. I think Freeman is really good here. I think Pitt is exceptionally good here because he has to play the hothead, because he's bouncing off both the shining light in the movie, which is Tracy, the Paltrow character, and the shining light, and then you know Somerset is an intellectual that's so much better than David, right? David is this kid from that's come in. He wants to be whatever, but they have great moments. Like another moment during the dinner sequence is beautiful. But the idea that they've rented an apartment where the fucking L in this unnamed city is going off every 15 minutes, and Pitt at the end says, "I was wondering why the guy didn't show us. It was very short the times he would show us the apartment." And then and then fucking Morgan Freeman just starts laughing, and it's great. And then they all start laughing, and it's just really, really ingrained. It makes the horror of the movie all the more relevant, and also everything that happens to Mills is this reaction to his hot-headedness, to his coming into something that he's not prepared for. Right? This shouldn't be his first case. This shouldn't. I will follow this to the end, but you should take him off this case because it is bleak, right? And you like, I was, when you rewatch it, like, they look so, like it looks so great together. When they have the scene after the dinner where they're going over the fucking, it's the first time they go over clues where they're not at each other's throats, right? And then, did you know that this sequence here, Brad Pitt broke his arm fucking around? He did something stupid, broke his arm, and so they built it into the script so he would have the fucking cast on when they shot that sequence. And so I was watching it going, oh, that they worked around this. But this, like I said, the dinner sequence is so beautiful. Paltrow has never been one of those actresses that I've gravitated towards, but she is such an effervescent light in this movie that is constantly fucking dark, Rich. It is constantly dark.
Mhm.
And I would say the interesting thing, when we came out of the screening we went to the IMAX, there were people who had never seen it, and they were talking up like problems they felt that the script had, or problems that they didn't understand why we saw some of the murders but not all of them. And I was just like, you have to take it for what it is. It's designed to be a meat grinder of a movie where you just kind of get in and it just starts rolling. And it's one of those thrillers that just keeps rolling right to the end. And then the ending is one of the single greatest film endings
Mhm.
ever put on film. It's just like, whether you agree that it completes the murder or not, because I have a friend who will fight me tooth and nail that it doesn't complete the cycle. And I'm like, okay, but it's a really great ending. And what's in the box has become so pop culture heavy that it's become part of our vernacular.
Yeah.
And
I
but
dare
it's
say that um you don't need to see all the murders. Once you kind of see the first couple, you get a good idea. And I
that they're
think,
bad, that they're awful.
you can walk the borderline of exploitation versus, you know, an actual adult driven story like this.
Like a grindhouse movie. Yes. Like Saw. You could run into a Saw problem. Right? That this movie also kind of like, but it's one of those movies where I think all the sum of its parts have really good direction from Fincher. It's a really good script. The cinematography is amazing. The set design's amazing. Production's amazing. The actors are all kind of like from all different places, and they all come together, and it's, you know, it becomes this great thing where you have teacher and student. One of my favorite lines of dialogue is they're reading through the list from the FBI agent, you know, that's going over books, and Mills gets to a point, and he's like, "Of human bondage?" He goes, "No, not that." You know, and then like Mills doesn't even know what human bondage is about. You know, he's, and I just, the more you watch this movie, the more I think of Pitt. His character's so in over its head. Doesn't know his wife's pregnant. Doesn't know she's unhappy. Like, knows she's unhappy, but doesn't really care. You know what I mean? Also, you know, doesn't realize that he has somebody that's trying to mentor him through a really difficult, you know, thing. And he's breaking rules. He's doing all kinds of stupid stuff that could get, you know, that could ruin the case. Like, he's just a live wire of emotion, and he's the exact opposite of Morgan Freeman. This, you know, intellectual, understands, you know, fucking Dante's Inferno. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, it's a perfect pairing. And then it also becomes like one of those things where their chemistry, they're movie stars. So the three of them in their sequence when they're eating dinner, it looks great, it sounds great, it feels great, that you're like, there might be a bit of humor, or there might be something, you know, left. Can I ask you a question about this movie?
Sure.
From a critique standpoint, have you ever thought about the endings of movies and just went, what happened to this character after this movie? And not that I want to see. This movie is one of those movies where, as the Pitt character who's had his fucking soul ripped out of him is being taken away in the police car, and Arlie Ermey has the silly line with, "We'll take care of him." What? How are you going to take care of him? And then that's one of those lines where you're just like, and then, like, you know,
given we've seen Morgan Freeman's character basically say, I use illegal sources with his FBI contact, and then they turn around and pay off that junkie to lie on a police report about how they found John Doe's apartment. I have a feeling they might just come up with some kind of bullshit story to cover for Brad Pitt, saying, oh, he tried to escape, and in the tussle we had to shoot John Doe in the head.
I don't know what happens. All I know is I look at the ending of this movie, and it is one of many characters that I've ever watched a movie for where I just was like, wonder what happened after. Like, it reminds me of the SNL skit where they do a Christmas Carol the following year. Yes. When Ebenezer Scrooge is broke, you know, and like, okay. Or the It's a Wonderful Life. Also,
for a second, I thought of the lost ending to It's a Wonderful Life.
But they also have one. I think it was Danny DeVito where they did a Scrooge, where he's like fucking broke the next year, and everybody's taking advantage of him. And I was like, but also the ending of you know, It's a Wonderful Life, where they kill Mr. What's his fucking name? What's his name? He's such a bad person. He's one of the most evil characters in the history of film. Mr. I don't know. Anyway, moving on.
I'm not sure where you're going there. All right.
Well, no, just like they kill him. They kill the guy from It's a Wonderful Life, the bad guy. It's a Wonderful Life.
Mr. Potter.
Mr. Potter. That's what Potter.
That's what I
couldn't remember. But you know, it got one Academy Award nomination, Rich, for Best Film Editing. But he didn't get a screenplay nomination. But it did win at the MTV Movie Awards, best movie of the year. Anyway, but it also did very well on home video. But it is one of those movies where even the critics back then were like, "It's dark, but it's good," right? Although
Mm-hmm.
some were harsh on it. You know, not everybody loved it. I was looking at Rotten Tomatoes as well, Rich. 84% from critics, 95 from people. We've had 2 weeks of movies where the critical response was 70s to 80s,
Mm-hmm.
but the overwhelming fan response 90s. Like these are 80s movie, an 80s movie and a 90s movie where everybody that grew up in the time frame or seen it goes, "This is pretty good." Like it deserves the accolades it gets, you know? And I think that's kind of cool. Now let's get to some negative stuff. Legacy, franchise viability. I don't think there's ever going to be a sequel. Although there are rumors all the way around about like, eight shit like that where you're like, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Where you're just like, how possibly? Um, which I think is interesting. Um, but it has grown in its esteem since '95, right? And it's making a lot of best film of all time lists now. Um, but the influence of this movie is off the charts. Fincher and his movie created a bunch of like they allowed for the subgenre of serial killer movies in the '90s to grow. We had Silence of the Lambs, but Seven is the one that's hip and got the cool music and has the really good looking movie star. You know what I mean? Like Seven
Mm-hmm.
is the one that I think leads to movies like Along Came a Spider or Copycat or you know what I mean, where they kind of flourish after Seven, right? Bone Collector, Saw actually owes such a debt to fucking Seven that you can't even put into words like the concept that Saw owes such a debt to Seven. The character in Saw being so similar to John Doe, watching people make stupid mistakes and then punishing them for their sins. And I don't know that it's a great legacy because part of the problem with the legacy, Rich, to me, is that this movie is better than anything else that came after it. And everything else that came after it seemed like they were all trying to be dark and hip and inventive and
they were
quirky.
they were
You know
chasing
what I mean?
what this movie, did.
Right, the high from this movie, right? Um, the It's weird though. The main thing to come out of it though is Fincher. Fincher has Alien 3 bombs as it deserved to do. And but this movie brought his career back. So after this he goes on to The Game and Fight Club and Panic Room and the FBI show on Netflix and all the things he's done since. David Fincher came out of this movie with a carte blanche from Hollywood, right? To make First off, please make us more serial killer stuff. We'll take all of it. Give it we'll take everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
But also the idea that Fincher, you know, I think the greatest legacy this movie has is that Fincher comes out of this smelling like roses, right? It
Yeah.
reinvigorates his career. It saves his career. And it puts him you know what I mean, where he's a hip young director and he's making good movies. It also changes Pitt's trajectory as well because Pitt might have been stuck playing pretty boys his entire career, but after this, he gets everything, right? He gets anything that you know, uh, he gets whatever, and then Freeman gets out of it. He becomes the mentor thing in a lot of movies. Like I'll give you an example of something I wasn't thinking about, but it's the Freeman character in a nutshell. Think about Freeman in Bruce Almighty. Not
Okay.
far from this role, the mentor to a hot young actor. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
it becomes a whole subgenre for him, which is interesting. What about you? What do you see?
I mean, I'm just kind of looking at Fincher's filmography at this moment. After this, he goes on to do The Game, which has its own dark layers. Fight Club, obviously. Panic Room, Zodiac. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button kind of stands out a little bit there. But then then The Social Network, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo, Gone Girl, Mank, and The Killer. I mean, this really kind of sets the tone for what
the rest
he
of
wants
his
to
career.
explore. Yeah, through his entire career, really.
Right,
with,
and he,
outsider exceptions. So, if this movie didn't get made, or if the studio insisted on the crap ending or something like that, would we have gotten everything else? Any of those other films?
Well, and
Possibly not.
and like
Probably
maybe not. Probably
yeah,
not.
and I don't want to live in that world. That seems like a terrible world to live in.
It seems like a bad world, no Zodiac, because that movie is fucking phenomenal.
Yes.
And he's made such great movies. Gone Girl, Girl with the Dragon Tattoo. Like, they're such great movies, and they're so intrinsically him. And again, the actors get a boost out of it too. But his legacy as a filmmaker, like, and we were talking about earlier, I think he's the one that looks at the dark underbelly now, right? He's the one that can look at different things from a person's perspective and have a murder in a small town or murder in general and just kind of look at the underbelly. So it kind of wraps around to Lynch, right? He's a little bit Lynchian in his makeup, and the way he looks at things are definitely pretty amazing. Let's see. So a couple comments. Just grateful for a monster movie in theater. Save the genre. It's not going anywhere, Joe. It's the most profitable genre in the business right now. Think summer slasher, Ken. So many memories. I was in junior high ish. Empire Records. I don't know why she said Empire Records.
Oh, because we were talking about Tower Records at that time.
Oh, okay. Empire Records. No, Tower Records was a franchise. You don't like the ending? Interesting.
No, I think that was when we were talking about one of the other draft endings.
Yeah, that ending is bad. Okay, good call.
Yeah.
Good call. Great shirts tonight. Thank you. Well, yeah, one's a film festival, and then I wore it again because of the Ned Beatty and Gene Hackman thing that I knew I was going to. But yeah, I mean, think about a world where we don't get David Fincher making Fight Club, or Zodiac, or the FBI show Manhunter on Netflix.
The slight bit of good there might be we don't get all those jack-offs misinterpreting Fight Club, which honestly would make the world a little bit shinier. But
I think Fight Club is one of those movies that also, like, the people that don't get it are far worse than the people who do. You know what I mean? Like,
but then again, it was a popular novel, so I have a feeling somebody eventually would have adapted Fight Club. And,
yes, we're lucky. We're lucky. But again, he's the first. He's the one that has the kind of thing. I think the legacy of Seven is always going to be that it is the other serial killer movie by which all other serial killer movies are. There are two. Silence of the Lambs and Seven are the two where you go. Those are the gold standard, right? In my opinion, anyway. But like, I mean, Zodiac's obviously up there, but I think Seven's better. But anyway, okay, good time. Where can people find you, Rich? Let's go there.
I can be found. All of my writing can be found at filmbuffonline.com, where we are in the midst of our ongoing series of examining the history of Saturday Night Live called SNL at 50. As well as some reviews and other fun things coming up. Oscar nominations on Thursday, so that's going to start us into the following week with some of our Oscar history posts, things like that. You can see the rest of everything we're doing at Filmbuff Online through our Facebook page. We post whenever there's a new story up, and we also post some additional on this date in film history and some other late-breaking news stories that we're not going to cover on the site, but we wanted you to know about. I work on two other podcasts besides this. One is Film Scribes, which is the official podcast of the Philadelphia Film Critics Circle. I'm actually the producer for that. And if all things go well tomorrow night, we should have a new episode dropping Wednesday. And the other podcast that I do is the one I do with my very best friend, Natasha Bogutsky. It's called The Big Picture Podcast. Our next episode is going to be recorded Thursday evening. Our response to the Academy Award nominations being announced on Thursday. And with any luck, I'll have that either Friday or Saturday out into the feeds.
And then you and I might get together. We might get together also on Friday, just you and I to talk about just what didn't work or what works.
Yeah, sure, we can do that.
So we might come and do that as well.
And I can be found on the socials at Filmbuff Rich on Twitter and Blue Sky, although I'm mostly on Blue Sky these days as Twitter has become an unusable hellscape.
It's gonna be in line for the times, my friend. Unusual hellscape isn't that the new motto of the Washington Post? Anyway,
pretty much. Ugh. Don't even get me started on it.
You can find me, JW the Movie Guy, Facebook, Twitter, Threads, Blue Sky. We're on IMDb. We're on Instagram, putting stuff up, talking about different things. Trying to navigate whatever. You can also find me tomorrow night with my fellas. The Indie Escape Network presents Loud and Nerdy tomorrow night, 9 p.m. We're going to talk about some movies coming out. We're going to talk about different things we've seen. Probably talk about the Wolfman a little bit more. Wolfman, it's not the Wolfman, it's just Wolfman. And a couple other things, as we always do. And then I will be on Troy Hill Talks this week. We're doing an episode where we're talking about the most anticipated movies, our 10 most anticipated movies of 2025. I mean, one is easy. One's super easy. It's the most anticipated movie for everybody, as far as I'm concerned. Anyway, but thank you for joining us tonight. I don't know what we're going to do next week, but we're going to work on it, and we'll have something good for you next week that celebrates an anniversary. And then we get into Oscar time. We get stuff to do, and then Natasha's coming in March. So look for us. We're super excited to be back. Thanks for joining us tonight. Have a great day. Go see a movie. Go watch something. Catch up with Oscar picks. Thursday mornings, it should be a good day for the film business. Have a good night.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Be kind.